Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into a world where boredom wasn't just an inconvenience, it was an 8-hour prison sentence on wheels. You're settling into a Victorian railway carriage, the year is 1875, and you've just realised with mounting horror that you have absolutely nothing to do for the next several hours. The leather seat creaks beneath you. The compartment smells of coal smoke and someone's overly enthusiastic use of lavender water. And through the smudged window you watch the same field roll by for what feels like eternity. The rhythmic clickety-clack of wheels on rails that seemed charming for the first 5 minutes has become a monotonous lullaby threatening to drive you slowly insane. You shift in your seat, trying to find a position that doesn't make your legs cramp, and you glance at your fellow passengers. 3 strangers who look just as desperately bored as you feel. The story may solve mysteries you never had an explanation for, like why your great-great-grandmother's diary contains 40 pages describing a single train journey, or why Victorians seem to read so voraciously. So, before you explore the story with me, please take a moment to help me subscribe to the channel, like and share this video, or maybe leave a comment below, but make sure you do it when you really like what I bring to you. Tell me where you're watching from tonight, whether you're in bed in Boston or winding down in Wellington, and if you've ever been stuck on a journey with absolutely nothing to do, I'd love to hear how you survived it. Now, let's keep the lights as soft as possible, turn on the fan for a gentle sound to help the story feel more emotional, and let's embark on tonight's journey together. The reality of Victorian train travel hits you like a steam whistle at dawn. This isn't the romantic adventure the railway posters promised. You're trapped in a wooden box hurtling through the countryside at the terrifying speed of 40 miles per hour, and the novelty has worn off approximately 30 seconds after departure. The compartment is designed for 6 passengers, though 8 have crammed themselves inside, and the woman across from you has already claimed the only decent armrest. You pat your pockets, hoping you've remembered to bring something, anything to occupy your mind during this journey from London to Edinburgh. Nothing. Not even a crumpled newspaper. This is the golden age of railway expansion, when tracks are spreading across Britain like iron veins, connecting cities and villages that once required days of bone-rattling stagecoach travel to reach. Everyone agrees that trains are marvellous, revolutionary, the very symbol of modern progress, but nobody, absolutely nobody, warned you about the crushing boredom. The compartment design itself seems engineered for maximum tedium. You're facing either forward or backward, staring at strangers or at the same 3 people you'll be intimately acquainted with by journey's end. There are no corridors to walk down, no dining cars to escape to, no gentle piano music drifting from a lounge. Just you, this box, and the endless countryside. Historians still argue whether the Victorians truly experienced boredom more intensely than we do, or if they simply lacked our modern vocabulary of distraction. What's certain is that they felt it acutely enough to spark an entire industry of boredom-battling innovations. The railway timetable shows your train makes 17 stops between here and Scotland, each one a brief respite where you can stretch your legs during the 7-minute station pause before the whistle blows and you're imprisoned again. You calculate quickly. If each stop offers 7 minutes of freedom, that's approximately 2 hours of relief across a journey that will consume most of your waking day. The gentleman to your left has already fallen into a sort of trance, eyes glazed over as he stares at the antimacassar on the seat back. You wonder if he's meditating or simply shutting down, the way a machine powers off when there's no work to be done. The 2 ladies near the window are maintaining the polite fiction that they're fascinated by the passing scenery, though you've all been looking at identical hedgerows for 40 minutes now. A child in the corner has started humming, a tuneless sound that promises to continue for hours unless someone intervenes. You feel panic rising in your chest, the realization that you have no escape, no relief, No rescue from this mind-numbing monotony. But wait. The gentleman across from you is reaching into his travelling bag, and your heart lifts with desperate hope. Perhaps he'll pull out a newspaper you can beg to read, or start a fascinating conversation about politics, or even, please, offer around some peppermints that will give you 30 seconds of sensory distraction. Instead, he extracts a small leather-bound book, and you watch with the intensity of a starving person watching someone else eat. The book's title is barely visible, but it appears to be a novel, and you curse yourself for not thinking to pack one. You didn't expect to need entertainment for a simple train journey. After all, won't the marvel of railway travel itself be sufficiently engaging? The answer, as the next hour drags by with geological slowness, is absolutely not. The revelation comes to you somewhere between Peterborough and Grantham, as you watch a fellow passenger devour a penny dreadful with the intensity of someone discovering water in a desert. Railway bookstalls, you suddenly realise, are the most brilliant business innovation of the century. Not because they sell books, but because they sell them to people who are desperately, catastrophically bored. You remember the W. Smith stall you rushed past at King's Cross Station, dismissing it as unnecessary. Now you would trade your second-best hat for anything from that magical kiosk of printed salvation. William Henry Smith II, never just William, always the full pompous title, figured out something revolutionary in 1848 when he opened his first railway bookstall. He understood that travellers aren't normal book buyers. You're not browsing leisurely, comparing titles, seeking literary merit. You're panicking. You have 4 minutes before your train departs, and you've just realised you'll be trapped in a box for 6 hours with nothing but your own thoughts. You'll buy anything: agricultural manual, a guide to Belgian architecture, last month's newspaper, a recipe book despite never having cooked a meal in your life. Smith recognised desperation when he saw it, and he built an empire on your boredom. The stalls spread like wildfire across every major station in Britain. By the time you're taking this journey in 1875, you cannot board a train without walking past towers of reading material, specifically designed for your predicament. The railway novel has become its own genre. Cheap, quickly printed, morally acceptable enough that a lady can read it in public. And crucially, exactly the right length to last from London to your destination. Publishers compete to produce books that can be read in a single journey, calculating word counts based on average railway speeds and travel times. It's literature by the mile. You watch the passenger with a penny dreadful turn another page, and you catalogue everything you know about these magical bookstalls. They're positioned at exactly the right spot on every platform, impossible to miss, positioned where crowds naturally bottleneck. The covers are lurid, designed to catch your eye in the chaos of steam and shouting porters. The prices are carefully calibrated, expensive enough to make profit, cheap enough that you won't hesitate when you're desperate. Smith has even convinced the railway companies that bookstalls add respectability to their stations, transforming them from mere transportation hubs into centres of culture and learning. Never mind that half the books are sensational trash. They're respectable trash, bound in cloth covers with serious-looking typography. Historians still argue whether railway bookstalls actually improved literacy rates, or simply converted existing readers into more voracious consumers. What's undeniable is that they changed what people read and how they read it. Before trains, you might spend weeks with a single novel, savouring it by the fireplace. Now you consume books like snacks, discarding them in station waiting rooms for the next desperate traveller to discover. The books themselves transform to match this new reality. Shorter chapters, more cliffhangers, faster pacing. Authors learn to write for the rhythm of railway travel, inserting natural stopping points at intervals that match station stops. The variety astounds you, even in memory. Smith's stalls stock everything from improving religious tracts to lurid murder mysteries. There are travel guides for people travelling to the very destinations you're heading toward. A genius bit of marketing, selling you information about a place moments before you arrive there. There are phrase books in French, German and Italian for those making continental connections. There are collections of poetry for the romantically inclined, though you suspect most poetry buyers are trying to impress fellow passengers rather than actually read the verses. There are even specialised magazines created exclusively for railway travellers, filled with short stories and articles designed to be read in chunks between stations. The economics are beautifully simple. Smith pays the railway company's rent for platform space, but that rent is modest because the railways recognise that bored, frustrated passengers are angry passengers. A bookstall is a pressure valve, releasing the tension of enforced idleness. The profit margins are substantial because you're not price sensitive when you're desperate. A book that costs sixpence to produce sells for 2 shillings, and you pay it gratefully because the alternative is 8 hours of staring at upholstery patterns. Smith becomes phenomenally wealthy, expanding from books into newspapers, magazines, and eventually refreshments, building a retail empire on the foundation of your boredom. You notice something else about railway reading. It's become socially acceptable in a way that reading in public previously wasn't. Before trains, reading while travelling marked you as antisocial, perhaps even rude. But the peculiar intimacy of railway compartments, where you're trapped with strangers in awkward proximity, makes reading not just acceptable, but positively polite. It's a shield, a signal that you're occupied and need not be disturbed. The book creates a bubble of privacy in public space. The woman across from you who pulled out a novel the moment she sat down isn't being rude. She's being considerate, sparing you the burden of conversation with a stranger. The great railway reading boom creates unexpected ripples through Victorian society. Authors who might have starved in previous generations now find steady work producing railway novels. Publishers who understand the format thrive while others fade. Even the content of literature shifts. Stories set on trains become popular. Murder mysteries featuring railway crimes, romances that begin in compartments. The train becomes both the solution to boredom and the setting for stories about that very boredom. You've read at least 3 novels that feature a character making the exact journey you're making now, experiencing the exact tedium you're experiencing, finding relief in, rather deliciously meta, a railway novel. The child who was humming earlier has now progressed to kicking the seat, and you fantasize about the bookstall you ignored. You picture yourself browsing the latest sensation, perhaps one of those American dime novels that Smith has started importing, with their Wild West adventures and impossible heroics, or maybe something more respectable. A volume of Dickens, who understood railway boredom so well he set entire passages of his novels in trains, capturing that peculiar sense of suspended time and compressed humanity. But no, you have nothing, and the gentleman with his leather-bound book shows no signs of sharing. At the next station stop you promise yourself you'll leap from the compartment and beg the platform vendor for anything, absolutely anything with words printed on it. Even an advertisement pamphlet would do at this point. You've learned your lesson about railway travel. Never, ever bored without reading material. William Henry Smith has won. You're converted to his gospel of portable literature. If only that conversion had come 1 station earlier. The worst part about Victorian train travel, you're discovering, isn't the boredom itself. It's the boredom combined with the social minefield of being locked in a box with complete strangers for hours on end. You glance nervously at the gentleman sitting directly across from you, wondering if he's the chatty type or the silent type, and which would actually be worse right now. The compartment door has no interior handle, a design feature meant to prevent accidents, but which effectively means you're imprisoned with these 5 strangers until the next station stop. You could be sharing this space with delightful companions who'll make the journey fly by with witty conversation. Or you could be trapped with a bore who'll lecture you about sheep farming for the next 6 hours. There's absolutely no way to know until someone opens their mouth. The social etiquette of railway travel is still being negotiated in 1875, which makes everything awkward and uncertain. Do you acknowledge your fellow passengers with a polite nod? Introduce yourself formally? Pretend they don't exist and stare fixedly out the window? Different classes have different rules, and even within your second-class compartment, there's confusion about what's proper. The elderly lady near the window has her face set in an expression that clearly communicates she will not be spoken to under any circumstances. The young man by the door keeps clear in his throat as if he's about to say something, then thinking better of it. You're all performing this elaborate dance of potential social interaction, each moment thick with the possibility that someone will break the silence. Historians still argue whether Victorian railway compartments were more dangerous or more tedious, since both possibilities terrified travellers equally. The popular press is filled with cautionary tales about railway murders, attacks, and improprieties, all made possible by the isolated compartment design. You've read about the notorious Franz Müller case, where a gentleman was murdered and thrown from a moving train in 1864. His body found beside the tracks. The killer was caught, but the case sparked a moral panic about railway safety. Now every time you enter a compartment with strangers, you can't help but assess them for murderous tendencies. That respectable-looking businessman, could he be a killer? The mild-mannered clerk, perhaps concealing violent impulses? The fear of conversation might actually exceed the fear of violence. You've heard horror stories about travellers trapped with insufferable bores, the man who recites his entire family genealogy, the woman who describes every ailment she's ever suffered, the amateur philosopher who wants to debate the meaning of existence for 8 consecutive hours. There's no escape, no polite way to excuse yourself, no social convention yet established for how to shut down unwanted conversation. You're stuck. And if someone decides you're going to hear about their opinions on railway nationalisation, you're going to hear about their opinions on railway nationalisation. Some passengers attempt to establish ground rules immediately. The gentleman with the book makes a show of opening it and diving into reading, a clear signal that he's unavailable for chat. The mother with 2 children apologises preemptively for any noise they might make, establishing herself as considerate and hoping for patience in return. You yourself have adopted what you hope is a pleasant but distant expression, approachable enough not to seem rude, but occupied enough to discourage lengthy conversations. It's an exhausting facial performance to maintain for hours, this delicate balance between civility and self-protection. The conversation, when it finally starts, begins with the weather, because of course it does. The businessman comments that it looks like rain, and you all turn to the window as if this is a fascinating meteorological observation, requiring deep consideration. Someone agrees. Someone else notes that rain was forecast. You contribute that you hope it clears by evening. 5 minutes of your life have been successfully consumed discussing clouds. You'll take it. Whether conversation is safe, finite, unlikely to veer into dangerous territory like politics or religion. You could easily spend another 10 minutes on variations a bit chilly for September, and at least it's not as bad as last week, But then disaster strikes. Someone asks what brings you to Edinburgh. It's a polite question, perfectly reasonable, and it opens the door to actual personal conversation. Now you must decide how much to share. Do you give a brief, conversation-ending response? Or do you elaborate, potentially opening yourself to follow-up questions and extended dialogue? You watch the businessman answer with practiced vagueness, business matters, and admire his skill. The young man, less experienced, makes the mistake of mentioning he's visiting his sister, which prompts the elderly lady to ask about his family, which leads to him describing his entire domestic situation, while the rest of you nod politely and die inside. The etiquette manuals of the era offer contradictory advice about railway conversation. Some insist that travel brings people together, and conversation is a Christian duty to relieve mutual tedium. Others warn that familiarity with strangers is dangerous and improper, especially for ladies. You're supposed to be friendly but not too friendly, talkative but not too talkative, interested but not too interested. It's an impossible balance, and you're quite certain you're failing at it. The woman next to you has asked your opinion on something, you weren't quite listening, and you make a non-committal sound that could mean agreement or contemplation or simply acknowledgement that noise was made. Some travellers have developed clever strategies to avoid conversation entirely. You've heard of people pretending to sleep for entire journeys, maintaining elaborate unconsciousness for hours to escape social obligation. Others fake foreign accents, claiming to speak no English, and thus relieving themselves of conversational duty. The truly bold bring work, account books or correspondence, and make a show of being too busy for chat. You consider all these options and wish desperately you'd thought to bring any of them. Instead, you're stuck with your honest face and your terrible inability to pretend you can't hear perfectly well when someone addresses you directly. The conversation has now turned to the topic of railway travel itself. Deliciously meta, you think, discussing trains while on a train. Everyone has an opinion about the state of the railways, the comfort of the seats, the punctuality of services, the outrageous cost of first-class tickets. It's safe territory again, communal complaining that bonds strangers without requiring real intimacy. You contribute your observation about the lack of reading material, which earns sympathetic nods and launches a discussion about W.H. Smith's bookstalls that consumes another blessed 20 minutes. You're learning to navigate this, to spend time without spending too much of yourself, to be sociable without being social. The young man has finally stopped talking about his sister, and a comfortable silence settles over the compartment. It's the best possible outcome. You've established that you're all pleasant people capable of civilized interaction, but not so enamoured with conversation that it must continue constantly. You can now lapse into quiet without rudeness, secure in the knowledge that if boredom becomes unbearable, conversation remains available as an option. It's a delicate piece, and you're grateful for it as the train rattles northward through the afternoon. The silence lasts exactly 14 minutes before the businessman reaches into his coat pocket and produces a deck of cards, and suddenly the entire energy of the compartment shifts. You sit up straighter, interested despite yourself, because cards mean entertainment, distraction, blessed relief from the monotony. He catches your eye and raises an eyebrow, an invitation. Within moments you've transformed from isolated strangers into potential gaming companions, and the long journey ahead suddenly seems less daunting. The Victorian railway compartment you're discovering is a surprisingly fertile ground for games of all kinds, from innocent pastimes to gambling that would scandalise the railway companies if they knew what happened behind those closed compartment doors. The businessman suggests whist, that respectable card game that's acceptable in polite society, and you nod eagerly. The young man who wouldn't stop talking about his sister proves useful after all. He makes a fourth player. The elderly lady declines with a sniff that suggests she considers card playing on trains to be dangerously close to moral decay. But she doesn't object to others playing, which is permission enough. You shuffle seats, arranging yourselves so partners sit across from each other, and suddenly the compartment feels less like a prison and more like a temporary club. The cards are worn soft from use. This businessman clearly makes this journey often and has perfected his boredom battling strategy. Playing cards on a moving train requires skills you hadn't anticipated. The table between you is barely large enough for the hands you're dealt, and every time the train lurches over points or rough track, cards slide and scatter. You develop a technique of keeping one hand on your cards at all times, pressing them flat against the table surface. Tricks are taken and stacked with deliberate care, weighted down by someone's pocket watch to prevent them from flying about the compartment. It's absurd and delightful, this serious card game played under such ridiculous conditions, and you find yourself actually enjoying the challenge. The rhythm of the train becomes part of the game. You learn to anticipate the jolts, to play your cards in the smooth moments between stations. Historians still argue whether railway gambling was as widespread as moral reformers claimed, or if their panic was overblown. What's certain is that cards, dice and various games of chance flourished in railway compartments, away from the disapproving eyes of authorities. You've heard stories of fortunes won and lost between London and Brighton, of professional gamblers who ride the rails looking for naive travellers to fleece, of elaborate cheating schemes involving confederates in multiple compartments. The businessman assures you this is just a friendly game, penny stakes at most, but you notice how skillfully he shuffles, how quickly he calculates the score. You're being hustled, probably, but you don't particularly mind. The entertainment is worth a few lost pennies. Not everyone gambles, of course. The mother with children has produced a portable chess set, teaching her eldest daughter the moves while the youngest watches with fascination. The pieces are weighted, designed specifically for travel, with little pegs on the bottom that fit into holes drilled in the board. Even when the train sways, the pieces stay put. You've seen similar travel sets for checkers, backgammon, and even elaborate games like Halma that you've never quite understood the rules for. Victorian ingenuity has created an entire industry of portable gaming equipment, everything designed to fold, compress, or otherwise adapt to the challenges of railway travel. Word games prove particularly popular because they require no equipment beyond imagination, and perhaps a pencil and paper. You've played I Love My Love on previous journeys, that alphabet game where each player must complete a sentence following the pattern I love my love with an A because she is amiable, I hate her with an A because she's argumentative, and so forth through the alphabet. It's mind-numbing and oddly compelling, consuming huge stretches of time in the challenge of finding adjectives for difficult letters like X and Z. The game reveals more about players than intended. The words they choose, the qualities they value or despise, the creativity of their vocabulary. You've learned to be cautious about playing it with strangers, lest you accidentally reveal too much about your inner character. The young man suggests 20 questions, which requires one player to think of an object while others try to guess it through yes or no questions. It's perfect for railway travel, needs no equipment, can accommodate any number of players, and can stretch to fill however much time needs filling. You've been on journeys where a single round lasted an hour because someone chose something impossibly obscure and revelled in watching others struggle. The businessman thinks for a moment, announces, I have it, and you begin the interrogation. Animal, vegetable, or mineral? The ancient categorization system that somehow never seems quite adequate for modern inventions like trains themselves. Children's games spill over into adult entertainment through sheer boredom. You find yourself actually interested when the mother starts a round of I Spy with her daughters, though the limited visual field of a railway compartment makes it almost comically simple. I spy with my little eye something beginning with W. It's the window, always the window, or occasionally the wood panelling. But even this simple game consumes time, makes miles pass, transforms tedium into something resembling fun. The youngest daughter chooses something beginning with L, and you all guess lamp luggage lady, before she reveals triumphantly that it's leg, specifically her own leg. Everyone laughs, even the disapproving elderly woman, and the compartment feels almost cosy. Some passengers bring more elaborate entertainments. You've seen travellers with portable magic tricks, cups and balls, disappearing coins, card forces and shuffles designed to amaze and astound. The performances are usually terrible, the tricks transparent, but the effort counts for something. You remember a journey where a gentleman spent an hour trying to master a simple card trick, failing repeatedly while his audience of captive passengers offered increasingly desperate encouragement. He never did get it right, but somehow that became the entertainment. Watching his determination in the face of continued failure, taking bets on whether he'd succeed before the next station. Riddles and puzzles circulate through railway culture like folklore. You know dozens of them now. the one about the two trains leaving stations at different times, the puzzle of the man who goes to town on Friday and stays 3 days but returns on Friday, the impossible question about which came first. These brain teasers pass from compartment to compartment, traveller to traveller, becoming part of the shared experience of Victorian railway travel. Some are genuinely clever, requiring logical thinking and mathematical skill. Others are simply tricks, relying on wordplay or deliberately misleading phrasing. You've started collecting them mentally, building a repertoire for future journeys. The whist game concludes. You've lost, as expected, but not embarrassingly, and the businessman carefully returns his cards to their case. The mother has moved on to teaching her daughter's cat's cradle, that string game where patterns pass from hand to hand. You watch the string configurations emerge and dissolve. The cup and saucer, the Jacob's ladder, the witch's broom, and you're struck by how these simple games have probably entertained travellers since humans first had to endure long journeys together. The technology has changed, the speed has increased, but the fundamental human need for distraction remains constant. Your ancestors battled boredom on week-long sea voyages with the same games you're playing now on a 6-hour train ride. You turn your attention back to the window, having exhausted the novelty of card games, and discover that observation itself has become an art form among railway travellers. What seemed like empty countryside when you first departed now reveals itself as an endlessly changing tableau of human drama, agricultural curiosity, and architectural wonder. If only you know how to look properly. The businessman who thrashed you at whist has resumed his position by the window, and you notice he's not just staring blankly but actually studying the landscape with the intensity of a detective examining clues. He's practicing what the guidebooks call railway observation, transforming passive window gazing into active entertainment. The trick you're learning is to create mental games from what passes by. You start counting sheep in the fields, losing track somewhere around 47 when the flock becomes a blur of wool. Then you switch to churches, tallying every steeple that appears on the horizon. You're up to 12 when you realise the young man is doing the same thing, and you exchange knowing glances, fellow practitioners of the sacred art of counting things to stay sane. Some travellers, you've heard, keep elaborate notebooks of their observations, recording every railway station, every bridge crossed, every town glimpsed in the distance. They're building comprehensive mental maps of Britain, one journey at a time, becoming amateur geographers through sheer boredom. The class of fellow travellers on the platforms provides endless entertainment. At each station stop you press your face to the window and catalogue the human parade. There's always the harried businessman sprinting for a connection, coattails flying. The family with too much luggage and too little time, frantically loading trunks while the porter shouts warnings about departure. The romantic couple saying goodbye with entirely too much emotion for the public platform. You've started to recognise types. The nervous first-time traveller clutching their ticket like a life preserver. The seasoned commuter who boards with bored efficiency. The vendor hawking meat pies with desperate enthusiasm. Each station offers a 7-minute theatrical performance, and you're the captive audience. Historians still argue whether the railway actually changed how people perceived landscape and distance, or if Victorian observers were simply more articulate about experiences humans had always had. What's undeniable is that train travel created a new way of seeing, the world framed by a window, moving past at unprecedented speeds, fragmentary and dreamlike. You're not walking through this landscape or riding through it on horseback, experiencing it intimately. You're watching it perform for you, a moving panorama designed for your entertainment. The distance between you and the scenery creates a peculiar relationship. You're close enough to see details, but far enough to remain safely separate, an observer rather than a participant. You develop techniques for maximising visual interest. When the landscape grows monotonous, and oh, does it grow monotonous through certain stretches of identical farmland, You focus on tiny details. A red barn door in a sea of brown ones, a horse that looks up as the train passes, ears pricked with curiosity, a child waving frantically from a cottage window, and you wave back even though they probably can't see you through the grimy glass. These small moments become precious, punctuation marks in the long sentence of countryside. You're writing a story from fragments, creating narrative from glimpses, turning observation into imagination. The telegraph wires provide their own hypnotic entertainment. You watch them dip and rise between poles, creating patterns that never quite repeat. Some travellers claim to see messages in the wires, as if the swooping lines spell out words or create pictures. You squint and try to see it, wondering if you're missing some secret language visible only to the truly bored. The wires seem to dance, keeping pace with the train, a companion for your journey. When they disappear into tunnels, you feel oddly bereft, waiting for them to reappear on the other side like an old friend returning. The social dynamics at each station offer particularly rich material for observation and speculation. You watch a woman embrace a man at York Station and immediately construct their entire story. She's his sister, no wait, his wife returning from visiting her dying mother, or perhaps she's someone entirely different. A lover meeting in secret while his real wife believes he's in Edinburgh on business. The truth is unknowable, but the speculation entertains you for a good 20 minutes. The businessman joins your game, offering his own interpretation. They're cousins who haven't seen each other in years, meeting to discuss an inheritance. The mother suggests they're newlyweds starting their honeymoon. Each theory is equally plausible, equally unprovable, equally effective at making the miles pass. You've become skilled at reading the landscape for clues about location and local industry. Slag heaps mean mining country. Rows of identical workers' cottages indicate a factory nearby. Church architecture shifts as you travel north. You're watching England transform into Scotland through stone and steeple. The fields change too, from wheat to barley to rougher grazing land as the terrain becomes more challenging. You're reading the countryside like a book, each chapter distinct, each offering new information about the people who live and work here. It's geography and economics and sociology all rolled into one moving lesson, and you're absorbing it almost unconsciously. The changing light transforms everything. The afternoon sun that seemed harsh and revealing when you departed has softened into golden hour, making even the humblest cottages look picturesque. Shadows lengthen across fields, creating dramatic contrasts that make you wish you were a painter or photographer. The landscape you dismissed as dull when viewed in flat midday light now reveals depth, texture, beauty you hadn't noticed. You understand why landscape painters spend so much time studying light. It changes everything, transforms the ordinary into the sublime. Even the inside of your compartment looks different. Dust motes dancing in the slanting sunbeams. Your fellow passengers' faces softened and made mysterious. You spot a deer at the edge of the wood, frozen in alert attention as the train rushes past, and everyone in the compartment turns to look. It's gone in a second, but that brief glimpse feels like a gift, a reward for your patient observation. The mother points it out to her daughters, who squeal with delight. The elderly woman permits herself a small smile. Even the businessman looks pleased, as if the deer appeared specifically for your entertainment. These shared moments of wonder break down the barriers between strangers, remind you that you're all humans together, all seeking beauty and distraction in a journey that sometimes feels endless. The sky is beginning to colour now, hints of pink and orange creeping into the clouds. You settle deeper into observation, knowing that sunset from a train window is one of the great free entertainments of railway travel. The day is ending, your journey is progressing, and through simple attention to the world outside your window, you've transformed hours of potential tedium into something approaching meditation. You've learned to see, really see, and the landscape rewards your attention with constant, subtle variation. The window isn't a frame for boredom, it's a portal to endless moving fascination, if only you're willing to look. The wooden mug in your hands contains the daily beverage that keeps your medieval family alive. Not water, which might carry the diseases that empty villages and graveyards, but weak ale that bubbles faintly with the fermentation that makes it safer to drink than anything drawn directly from wells or streams. You sip the thin, sour liquid that tastes nothing like the strong ale served in taverns, but provides the crucial calories and relative safety that water alone cannot offer. This isn't recreational drinking, but survival hydration, the result of brewing techniques that transform contaminated water and precious grain into something that won't kill your children, while providing the energy needed for another day's struggle against winter hunger. Your ale brewing follows recipes measured not in precise quantities, but in handfuls, pinches, and the intuitive knowledge passed down through generations of women who understood that fermentation creates both alcohol and safety from the waterborne illnesses that claim lives as surely as starvation. The process begins with barley, when you can afford it, or whatever grain you can spare from bread making, oats, wheat, even peas ground into meal that will ferment into something drinkable. The grain steeps in heated water until it releases its starches, creating the sweet liquid that wild yeasts will transform into weak alcohol and the slight carbonation that signals successful brewing. The weakness of your daily ale reflects not brewing failure but deliberate strategy, creating a beverage that provides hydration and calories without the intoxication that would interfere with the constant vigilance required for medieval survival. Children drink this weak ale from the time they're weaned, their developing bodies receiving liquid nutrition that supplements inadequate solid food while avoiding the contaminated water that kills infants and adults alike. Your brewing aims for alcohol content just sufficient to prevent spoilage and bacterial growth, not the strength that marks feast day celebrations or tavern revelry. Your brewing equipment occupies precious space in your single-room cottage, each vessel serving multiple purposes because specialization remains a luxury your family cannot afford. The large clay pot that ferments ale also serves for cooking, storage and washing during non-brewing periods. Wooden paddles used for stirring mash double as cooking utensils and even defensive weapons when necessity demands. The cloth strainers that separate liquid from grain solids provide filters for other cooking tasks, their holes worn and maintained through constant use across multiple household functions. Historians still argue whether medieval ale consumption was as universal as surviving records suggest, or if documentation bias emphasizes brewing because it was regulated and taxed, while other beverages left fewer written traces. Your daily experience confirms ale's centrality. Every meal includes the weak brew, every person in your household expects their share, and the brewing pot never stays empty for long because the alternative means risking illness from contaminated water sources that lack the fermentation protection against dangerous microorganisms. The seasonal variations in your ale brewing reflect the annual cycles of grain availability and storage challenges that shape every aspect of medieval food production. Spring brewing uses the last stores of winter grain, creating ale that must last until early summer's first barley harvest provides fresh brewing materials. Summer ales can be stronger and more flavorful when grain supplies peak, while autumn brewing focuses on creating ales that will keep through winter without spoiling in cold conditions that slow fermentation, but also reduce preservation effectiveness. Your yeast sources come from the wild populations that colonize brewing vessels over time, creating the living cultures that transform sweet grain liquid into alcoholic ale through mysterious processes you observe but don't fully understand. Successful brewing vessels accumulate beneficial yeast strains that produce consistent results, making your brewing pot itself a precious possession that represents years of developing the right microbial environment. When brewing pots crack or break, starting over with new vessels means weeks of uncertain fermentation while wild yeasts establish colonies that may or may not produce drinkable results. The water sources for your brewing require careful selection and treatment, creating additional labour in the ale production process that competes with other survival tasks for your limited time and energy. Well, water, when available, provides the safest starting point, though even wells can become contaminated during wet seasons or when located too close to waste disposal areas. Stream water requires boiling before use, consuming precious fuel while adding time to brewing schedules already constrained by other household demands. Collected rainwater offers purity but depends on weather cooperation and adequate container capacity. Your ale storage presents ongoing challenges in maintaining quality while preventing spoilage that would waste precious grain and leave your family without safe drinking liquid. Clay vessels sealed with beeswax provide the best protection against contamination, though their cost limits most families to wooden barrels that breathe enough to prevent pressure build-up while allowing some air exchange that can introduce spoilage organisms. Underground storage moderates temperature swings that can ruin fermentation, but digging storage cellars requires labour and materials beyond most peasant families' resources. The social aspects of ale brewing create community networks centred around shared knowledge, equipment borrowing, and cooperative labour during intensive brewing periods. Experienced brewers share yeast starters with neighbours whose own fermentation cultures have failed, understanding that today's generosity ensures future reciprocity when their own brewing encounters problems. Equipment sharing allows multiple families to access brewing vessels they couldn't individually afford, while cooperative brewing sessions distribute labour while building social bonds that strengthen village community ties. Your rationing of ale consumption follows careful calculations that balance immediate hydration needs against finite grain supplies, creating household policies that determine who drinks how much when resources become critically low. Adults receive priority during heavy labour periods when dehydration poses immediate dangers, while children's portions adjust according to age, size, and health status. Pregnant and nursing women require additional ale portions to support their increased nutritional needs, though providing these extra rations strains household supplies during months when every grain counts towards survival. The medicinal properties attributed to ale extend beyond simple hydration to encompass treatments for various ailments that plague medieval families through winter months of poor nutrition and cold exposure. Ale mixed with herbs creates tinctures believed effective against digestive problems, respiratory ailments, and the general weakness that accompanies chronic malnutrition. Hot ale serves as warming treatment for colds and fever, while aged ale provides what you believe are strengthening properties for recovering invalids who need liquid nutrition. Your brewing failures create household crises that extend beyond lost grain to encompass the dangerous prospect of reverting to water consumption with its associated health risks. Ale that turns sour or develops off flavours represents wasted resources that cannot be recovered, forcing difficult decisions about whether to consume questionable beverages or risk dehydration and illness from unsafe alternatives. Learning to recognise early signs of brewing problems allows intervention that might salvage batches that would otherwise become total losses. Skills developed through experience with various failure modes and recovery techniques. The fuel costs of ale brewing compete with heating and cooking needs for your limited supplies of wood, peat and dried dung, creating complex resource allocation decisions that pit liquid safety against thermal comfort and food preparation requirements. Brewing requires sustained heat for initial mashing and periodic warming during fermentation, consuming fuel quantities that could otherwise provide warmth or cook multiple meals. Balancing these competing needs requires careful planning that accounts for weather predictions, family health status, and the current state of your various resource stockpiles. The gentle lowing of your family's cow echoes from the small lean-to attached to your cottage, a sound that represents both hope and anxiety as you calculate how much longer her milk production will sustain your family through winter's deepest months. You wrap your shawl around your shoulders and venture into the cold pre-dawn air, wooden bucket in hand, knowing that Brownie's udders may yield only a cup or two of the precious liquid that yesterday produced nearly a quart. The seasonal rhythms of dairy production follow ancient patterns that mock human hunger with their indifference. Cows give abundant milk during spring and summer when grass grows rich and green, but winter's scarcity affects them as surely as it affects your own family, their milk dwindling just when you need its calories and nutrition most desperately. Your daily milking ritual requires skills that balance animal husbandry with food production, understanding that a stressed or poorly fed cow produces less milk while consuming the same precious fodder that represents significant investment in future nutrition. Brownie's winter feed consists of hay you spent autumn months cutting and storing, supplemented by turnip tops, apple peels, and whatever kitchen scraps provide nutrition without competing directly with human food needs. The mathematics of dairy farming create constant calculations: feed invested versus milk produced, immediate consumption versus preservation for future meals, the cow's health requirements versus your family's desperate hunger that makes sharing scarce resources with livestock feel almost criminal. Your knowledge of milk preservation encompasses techniques that transform the quickly spoiling fresh liquid into forms that remain edible for days or weeks. Chemistry you understand through generations of observation rather than scientific explanation. Fresh milk, consumed immediately, provides maximum nutrition but spoils within hours in your cottage's uncontrolled temperatures. Skimming cream allows you to churn butter that preserves milk fat in concentrated form, though the labour required and fuel needed for churning compete with other survival tasks demanding your attention. Cheese making, when you possess enough milk to make the process worthwhile, creates protein-rich food that keeps for weeks while concentrating nutrition into portable, storage-friendly formats. The seasonal patterns of dairy production create annual cycles of abundance and scarcity that require careful planning and preservation to bridge the gap between summer's plenty and winter's want. Spring calving produces the year's highest milk yields when fresh grass provides optimal cow nutrition, creating brief periods when your family enjoys relative dairy luxury while you frantically work to preserve surplus milk in forms that will last through the coming lean months. Summer milking continues at high levels while you make cheese and butter, building stockpiles that must sustain your family through autumn's declining production and winter's near-complete cessation of fresh milk. Historians still argue whether medieval peasant families typically owned dairy cows, or if most relied on communal herds and purchased dairy products, though your own cow represents a substantial investment that required years of saving and careful planning to acquire. The initial cost of purchasing Brownie consumed resources equivalent to several months of your husband's labour, while her ongoing feed requirements compete directly with human food needs during periods of scarcity. Yet her milk production, even reduced by winter conditions, provides nutrition that could mean survival for your children when other protein sources become unavailable or prohibitively expensive. Your cheese making follows techniques that require precise timing and environmental control, challenging to achieve in a medieval cottage where temperature and cleanliness remain difficult to manage. Fresh milk heated to specific temperatures, judged by touching rather than measuring, receives rennet from a calf's stomach to form curds that separate from liquid whey. The curds require pressing under weights that squeeze out moisture while forming the dense texture that resists spoilage, a process demanding constant attention over days while competing with other household tasks that cannot be neglected without dangerous consequences. The butter production process transforms cream into concentrated fat that provides crucial calories during winter months when other fat sources become unavailable or unaffordable, though churning requires physical labour that exhausts energy you can barely spare for other survival activities. Cream separation occurs naturally when milk stands undisturbed, allowing lighter fats to rise where you can skim them into containers that accumulate enough volume for churning. The actual churning, performed with wooden paddles and clay vessels, demands rhythmic motion continued for hours until cream transforms into butter and buttermilk, both valuable for different nutritional purposes. Your goats, smaller and hardier than cattle, continue producing modest amounts of milk even when winter conditions would stop cow production entirely. Though their strong flavoured milk requires adjustment of recipes and expectations, while providing crucial backup nutrition when primary dairy sources fail. Goat milk's different fat content and flavour profile make it less suitable for some preservation techniques, while working better for others, creating specialised knowledge about which preservation methods work best with which animals' production. The goat's ability to survive on marginal vegetation and food scraps makes them valuable additions to your livestock holdings, despite their smaller individual milk yields. The social aspects of dairy production create community networks focused on shared knowledge about animal care, preservation techniques, and cooperative labour during intensive dairy processing periods. Neighbours share expertise about treating sick animals, preserving milk products, and managing breeding cycles that determine when fresh milk becomes available. Equipment sharing allows families to access cheese presses and churning vessels they couldn't individually afford. While cooperative dairy processing distributes labour while building village relationships that provide mutual support during medical or economic crises. Your milk rationing follows household hierarchies that prioritise growing children and pregnant or nursing mothers while adjusting portions according to available supply and competing nutritional needs. Fresh milk, when available, goes first to the youngest children whose developing bodies most desperately need its complete nutrition and whose small stomachs cannot extract adequate nutrition from less concentrated sources. Adult portions depend on physical labour demands and health status, with sick family members receiving priority while healthy adults make do with smaller portions or preserve dairy products that provide less immediate nutritional impact. The medicinal properties attributed to various dairy products extend beyond nutrition to encompass treatments for illnesses and injuries that modern medicine would approach through entirely different methods, your medieval worldview recognizing no clear distinction between food and medicine. Warm milk mixed with honey soothes coughs and sore throats during winter months when respiratory illnesses threaten family health. Fresh butter serves as base for herbal salves that treat wounds and joint pain, while aged cheese provides what you believe are strengthening properties for people recovering from serious illness or injury. Your dairy storage challenges encompass protecting valuable milk products from spoilage, theft, and pest damage while working within the severe limitations of medieval food preservation technology and storage facilities. Fresh milk requires immediate consumption or processing, its short shelf life creating pressure to use every drop before spoilage wastes precious nutrition. Butter and cheese need cool, dry storage conditions difficult to achieve in single-room cottages where temperature control remains impossible and moisture threatens to spoil carefully preserved foods. Underground storage, when available, provides stability that extends dairy product life while creating new challenges around access and protection. The breeding management of your dairy animals requires understanding reproductive cycles and genetic factors that determine future milk production, decisions that balance immediate needs against long-term dairy sustainability. Breeding decisions determine when calves will be born and fresh milk will become available. Timing that you try to coordinate with seasonal feed availability and family nutritional needs. Bull access, whether through owning male animals or paying for breeding services, represents additional costs that must be weighed against the future milk production that successful breeding ensures. The economic calculations surrounding dairy production encompass not only direct costs and benefits, but also opportunity costs of resources dedicated to animal maintenance rather than immediate human consumption, creating complex decisions about resource allocation during periods of severe scarcity. Feed given to cows and goats could alternatively support human nutrition, while labour spent on dairy production competes with other survival activities like food gathering, fuel collection and household maintenance. The decision to maintain dairy animals represents a bet on future milk production offsetting immediate resource costs, gambling current survival needs against potential future benefits. The root cellar beneath your cottage floor represents your family's most precious insurance against starvation. Its earthen walls lined with carefully arranged turnips, onions, and the few precious cabbages that must sustain you through winter's darkest months, when fresh food becomes memory and survival depends entirely on your autumn preservation skills. You descend the rough wooden steps, candle flame flickering in the damp air, and survey the diminishing stores with a calculating eye of someone who knows that miscounting could mean death before spring's first edible greens emerge. Each root vegetable represents a meal, each onion a day's flavouring that makes survival food bearable, and the gradual depletion of these stores marks time more accurately than any calendar in a world where tomorrow's hunger looms larger than yesterday's plenty. Your knowledge of root storage encompasses generations of hard-won wisdom about temperature, humidity, and handling techniques that determine whether vegetables remain edible through winter or rot into useless mush that mocks your family's desperate need. Turnips, hardy and reliable, store best when their greens are removed but their roots remain unwashed, the natural dirt coating providing protection against moisture loss and decay. Carrots buried in sand maintain their sweetness and crunch longer than those stored in open air, though acquiring enough sand for proper storage requires labour and transport that compete with other survival preparations, demanding your limited time and energy. The timing of your harvest for storage creates critical decisions that balance maximum vegetable development against weather conditions that could destroy entire crops through early frost or excessive rain that promotes rot before vegetables can be safely stored. Turnips pulled too early lack the size needed to sustain your family through winter, while those left too long in the ground risk freezing that makes them inedible or difficult to store effectively. Your experience teaches you to read weather signs and soil conditions, making harvest decisions based on clouds, wind patterns, and the subtle changes in plant appearance that signal optimal storage readiness. Your storage techniques vary according to each vegetable's specific preservation requirements, creating a complex system that maximizes the useful life of different crops while working within the severe limitations of medieval storage technology. Onions require dry, ventilated conditions that prevent sprouting and rot, leading you to braid them into hanging strings that occupy cottage rafters while keeping them accessible for daily cooking needs. Cabbage heads, wrapped in their outer leaves and buried in straw, maintain freshness longer than those stored in open air, though this method requires dry straw that you must gather and store specifically for vegetable preservation purposes. Historians still argue whether medieval peasant families achieved adequate vegetable storage to prevent scurvy and other nutritional deficiencies, or if vitamin shortages represented inevitable aspects of peasant life during winter months. Your own experience suggests that proper storage can maintain vegetable nutrition through most of the winter, though by spring even well-preserved vegetables show signs of nutritional decline that leave your family vulnerable to the weakness and illness that mark the hungry months before fresh food becomes available again. Your root cellar construction required significant investment in time and materials that competed with other survival preparations, creating a storage facility that must serve multiple preservation needs while remaining accessible during winter weather that makes above-ground storage impossible. The excavation itself consumed days of heavy labour, digging through hard-packed earth to create a space large enough for your family's storage needs while remaining small enough to maintain stable temperatures. Stone lining, when you could afford it, provides walls that resist moisture and pest intrusion, while creating thermal mass that moderates temperature fluctuations threatening stored vegetables. The layering techniques you use for vegetable storage create organised systems that allow access to stored food without disturbing other vegetables that might spoil if exposed to air and handling before their time for consumption. Root vegetables arranged in sand or straw layers remain separated from direct contact with each other, preventing decay from spreading through entire storage batches when individual vegetables begin to spoil. The rotation system you follow ensures that older stored vegetables get used before newer ones, though tracking storage dates requires mental organisation systems that become increasingly important as storage depletes and every remaining vegetable becomes precious. Your pest control strategies encompass physical barriers, environmental management, and constant vigilance against the mice, rats, and insects that view your stored vegetables as readily available food sources during winter months when other nutrition becomes scarce. Clay pots sealed with beeswax create barriers against smaller pests, though their cost limits their use to the most precious stored foods. Dried herbs scattered among stored vegetables provide natural pest deterrents while potentially adding flavour to foods that become increasingly monotonous as winter progresses and variety disappears from your limited menu options. The gradual deterioration of stored vegetables requires daily assessment and quick action to prevent spoilage from spreading through your precious winter stores, creating additional labour demands during months when every task competes for your limited energy and daylight hours. Vegetables showing signs of softening or discoloration must be used immediately, forcing menu changes that might not align with your family's preferences, but which prevent waste of irreplaceable nutrition. The sorting process becomes increasingly critical as storage time extends, requiring you to handle every stored vegetable regularly while risking damage from excessive handling. Your preservation techniques extend beyond simple storage to encompass processing methods that transform fresh vegetables into forms that keep longer while providing different nutritional and culinary properties throughout the winter months. Sauerkraut production ferments cabbage into acidic form that resists spoilage, while providing nutrition that your body craves after months of limited fresh food. Dried vegetable slices. When you can spare fuel for the drying process, concentrate nutrition into forms that occupy less storage space while remaining edible for extended periods. The social aspects of vegetable storage create community networks focused on sharing preservation knowledge, trading surplus vegetables for other stored foods, and providing mutual assistance during storage preparation periods that require intensive labour within short seasonal windows. Neighbours share techniques for extending storage life, pest control methods, and recipes that make stored vegetables palatable throughout winter months, when variety becomes increasingly limited. Trading relationships allow families to diversify their stored vegetable supplies, exchanging surplus turnips for onions or cabbage that provide nutritional variety impossible to achieve from individual family gardens. Your children's roles in vegetable storage encompass learning preservation techniques while providing labour that makes family storage operations possible, education that prepares them for their own future survival while contributing to immediate household needs. Teaching proper handling techniques prevents damage that could spoil stored vegetables, while instruction in storage rotation ensures that vegetables get used in proper sequence to minimize waste. Children learn to identify spoilage signs and pest damage, developing skills that will determine their own family's survival during future winter months, when stored vegetables represent the difference between life and death. The nutritional planning around stored vegetables requires understanding which nutrients remain available in preserved form and which disappear during storage, creating meal planning strategies that address family health needs while working within the severe limitations of medieval food preservation technology. Root vegetables maintain many nutrients through proper storage, though vitamin content gradually declines as winter progresses, and even well-preserved vegetables lose nutritional potency. Your meal planning attempts to balance stored vegetable consumption with other available nutrition sources, creating combinations that provide adequate nutrition while stretching limited supplies through the entire winter period. The economic calculations surrounding vegetable storage encompass not only production costs, but also the labour, materials and opportunity costs associated with preservation efforts that compete with other survival preparations for your family's limited resources. Storage construction requires materials that could be used for other purposes, while preservation labour competes with food gathering, fuel collection, and other activities essential for winter survival. The decision to invest heavily in vegetable storage represents a calculated risk that preservation efforts will pay off through improved winter nutrition, weighing immediate costs against potential future benefits during months when stored food becomes your family's primary nutrition source. The church bells that ring across your village this cold morning announce not just the passage of time, but the complex calendar of feast and fast that governs when your family may eat meat, when you must survive on bread and vegetables alone, and when rare celebration demands food expenditures that could otherwise sustain you for weeks. You kneel on the rough stone floor of the parish church, stomach growling audibly during the priest's sermon about spiritual nourishment, or your mind calculates whether Tuesday's holy obligations permit the small piece of salted pork you've been saving, or if Catholic law demands another meatless meal from your already depleted winter stores. The medieval calendar doesn't merely mark days, it dictates nutrition, creating a religious framework that transforms eating from simple survival into moral territory, where your soul's salvation intertwines with your body's desperate hunger. Your understanding of the Church's dietary laws encompasses a complex system that designates nearly half the year as fasting periods, when meat consumption becomes sinful, creating additional challenges for families already struggling to maintain adequate nutrition through winter's scarcity. Fridays throughout the year prohibit meat, forcing reliance on fish when available or vegetables and grain when fish remains unaffordable or unobtainable. Lent's 40 days of fasting arrive precisely when your winter stores reach their lowest point, demanding spiritual sacrifice during the season when your body most desperately needs the concentrated nutrition that meat provides. Advent, Ember Days, and various saints' feast preparations add additional fasting requirements that pile religious obligation onto physical deprivation. The distinction between fasting and starving becomes academic when your family faces both simultaneously. Religious law prohibiting foods that might not be available anyway, while adding guilt to the simple act of seeking adequate nutrition. Fast days that forbid meat, dairy, and eggs eliminate precisely the foods that provide concentrated protein and fat your family needs most during winter months when physical labour continues despite reduced caloric intake. Your attempts to follow church dietary laws while maintaining family health create impossible choices between spiritual obedience and physical survival, decisions that weigh salvation against starvation in calculations that would challenge medieval theologians. Your feast day preparations represent the year's rare opportunities for abundant eating, moments when religious celebration demands food expenditures that consume resources saved over months, while creating memories that sustain morale through subsequent periods of deprivation. Christmas dinner, if you can manage it, might include actual meat, perhaps a chicken raised specifically for this purpose or a piece of beef purchased through careful saving and trading. Easter's celebration of Christ's resurrection coincides with spring's first fresh foods, creating natural abundance that makes religious feasting possible without destroying your family's survival prospects for the coming year. Historians still argue whether medieval peasants strictly observed church dietary laws or if practical necessity forced widespread violations that church authorities chose to overlook, though your own experience suggests a complex negotiation between religious obligation and survival needs. Priests understand that starving congregations cannot maintain the labour that supports church finances, creating unofficial flexibility around fasting requirements when local conditions make strict observance deadly. Your village priest occasionally suggests that children, pregnant women, and sick adults might be exempt from certain fasting requirements, though these exceptions require careful justification that balances spiritual law with practical compassion. Your fish consumption during fast periods depends entirely on availability and cost factors that often make religious compliance more expensive than your family can afford, creating additional stress around dietary laws that assume access to alternative protein sources. Fresh fish from local streams provides free protein when seasonal runs bring them close enough for catching, but winter fishing requires equipment, time, and skills that compete with other survival activities while offering uncertain returns. Salt fish from coastal regions cost precious coins that might otherwise purchase grain or fuel, making religious compliance a luxury that competes directly with other survival needs. The preparation of feast meals requires planning and resource accumulation that begins months in advance, creating anticipation and anxiety that builds towards celebration days when your family briefly experiences the abundance that marks normal eating for wealthier classes. Saving ingredients for Christmas dinner means reducing daily nutrition throughout autumn, storing precious foods while your family grows thinner in preparation for a single day's indulgence. The psychological importance of feast days provides motivation that sustains families through periods of deprivation, creating shared goals that unite families around future celebration while justifying present sacrifice. Your knowledge of acceptable fast day foods encompasses understanding subtle distinctions that determine whether particular items violate church dietary laws, creating theological complexity around basic nutrition that adds intellectual challenge to physical survival. Fish versus meat distinctions allow certain aquatic creatures while prohibiting others, though your practical experience with local wildlife makes these categories less clear than church law suggests. Dairy restrictions during certain fasts eliminate cheese and butter that provide crucial nutrition, forcing a reliance on plant-based foods that may not provide adequate calories for heavy physical labour. The social aspects of religious dietary observance create community pressure that enforces compliance while providing mutual support during periods when fasting requirements create shared hardship throughout your village. Public feast day celebrations demonstrate individual families' prosperity and piety while redistributing food through sharing customs that ensure even the poorest families participate in community abundance. Fasting periods create collective experiences of deprivation that build village solidarity while establishing social hierarchies based on families' ability to maintain religious observance despite economic hardship. Your children's religious education around food encompasses learning dietary laws while understanding their family's economic limitations that make perfect compliance impossible, creating moral flexibility that balances spiritual instruction with survival pragmatism. Teaching children about feast and fast cycles prepares them for adult religious observance while explaining why family practices might not always align perfectly with church teachings. Children learn to appreciate feast day abundance while understanding that such celebration requires sacrifice during ordinary times, developing attitudes toward food that balance gratitude with realistic expectations about availability. The medical exemptions from fasting requirements provide official recognition that religious dietary laws cannot supersede basic survival needs, though claiming such exemptions requires careful justification that balances spiritual obligations with physical realities. Pregnant women, nursing mothers, and seriously ill family members might receive permission to eat meat during fast periods, though these exemptions require priestly approval that may not always be available or sympathetic. Your understanding of when to seek such exemptions involves calculating whether family members' health situations justify the social complications that arise from appearing to violate religious law. The seasonal timing of major fasting periods creates additional challenges by coinciding with periods when food supplies naturally reach their lowest points. Religious requirements, adding spiritual pressure to physical deprivation that already tests your family's endurance. Lent's arrival during late winter means fasting when stored foods dwindle and fresh foods remain months away, demanding religious sacrifice precisely when your body most desperately needs concentrated nutrition. Advent's December fasting occurs when cold weather increases caloric needs, while daylight hours limit food gathering opportunities, creating perfect storms of religious and practical challenges. The economic impact of feast day celebrations creates annual financial cycles that require careful planning and saving to meet religious expectations while maintaining family survival throughout the year. Celebrations that consume resources saved over months, while creating social obligations that extend beyond immediate family. Feast day food purchases might exhaust savings accumulated through careful economy, while social expectations around hospitality and sharing create pressure to spend beyond your family's means. The balance between appropriate celebration and financial prudence requires navigation of social expectations that could bankrupt families attempting to maintain religious and social standing through food-based demonstrations of prosperity and piety. The central hearth that dominates your single-room cottage glows with carefully tended embers, its flickering flames representing both your family's salvation and its greatest daily danger as you navigate the delicate art of cooking over open fire without burning down the only shelter that stands between your family and winter's killing cold. You kneel beside the stone-lined fire pit, feeding dried twigs to coax the flames higher while positioning your iron pot at precisely the right distance. Close enough to cook your meager stew, but far enough to prevent the contents from scorching or the wooden handle from catching fire. Every meal becomes an exercise in controlled combustion, a dance with flames that demands constant attention and hard-won skills that separate successful survival from the charred remains of households where cooking fires escaped their master's control. Your fire management skills encompass understanding different fuel types and their burning characteristics, knowledge that determines not only cooking success, but also the efficient use of precious combustible materials that must last through winter's long months when gathering fuel becomes increasingly difficult and dangerous. Dry hardwood burns hot and clean, providing intense heat perfect for quick cooking tasks, but its scarcity makes it too precious for everyday use, except when specific recipes demand high temperatures. Softwood burns faster and produces more smoke, creating cooking challenges while consuming fuel supplies at rates that threaten your family's heating needs during the coldest months when survival depends on maintaining warmth through the long winter nights. The positioning of your cooking vessels requires constant adjustment as fire conditions change, flames rise and fall, and different cooking tasks demand varying heat levels throughout meal preparation that can stretch across hours of careful tending. Iron pots suspended on chains allow height adjustments that control cooking temperature, raising vessels higher when flames burn too hot or lowering them when heat diminishes and cooking slows to dangerous levels where food might spoil before becoming safe to eat. The pot's position determines whether your pottage simmers gently or boils vigorously, whether meat renders its fat slowly or burns on the outside while remaining raw within. Your cooking tools reflect the harsh realities of open fire cooking, each implement designed to handle extreme heat while providing the control necessary for successful meal preparation in conditions that would challenge modern chefs, equipped with precise temperature controls and safety equipment. Long-handled wooden spoons keep your hands safely distant from flames while allowing stirring that prevents food from burning to pot bottoms. Iron hooks and chains provide adjustable hanging systems for pots too heavy to position manually, their metal construction withstanding repeated heating and cooling cycles that would destroy other materials within seasons of regular use. Historians still argue whether medieval open fire cooking produced adequately cooked food, or if inadequate heating contributed to foodborne illnesses that claimed lives throughout peasant communities. Though your own experience suggests that proper technique creates thoroughly cooked meals, while improper management leads to both burned exteriors and dangerously undercooked interiors. The key lies in understanding fire behavior, heat distribution, and timing that ensures food reaches safe internal temperatures while remaining palatable rather than charred beyond recognition or consumption. Your smoke management becomes crucial not only for cooking success, but for family health in the confined space where cooking, eating, sleeping, and all other life activities occur within a single room that lacks adequate ventilation for the volumes of smoke that cooking produces. The hole in your roof provides the only smoke escape, creating drafts that sometimes blow smoke back into your living space while failing to remove all combustion products from the air your family breathes constantly. Positioning your cooking fire to optimize smoke flow requires understanding wind patterns, roof design, and the delicate balance between adequate ventilation and heat conservation that keeps your cottage warm while allowing cooking smoke to escape. The timing of cooking tasks requires coordination with fire maintenance schedules that balance cooking needs against heating requirements and fuel conservation strategies that determine when fires burn hotly and when they must be banked to extend fuel supplies. Morning cooking begins while banked overnight fires still contain enough heat for rekindling, saving precious kindling materials while providing early heat for breakfast preparation. Evening cooking utilizes the day's hottest fires when heating needs decline, but cooking demands require sustained high temperatures for thorough food preparation that ensures family nutrition and food safety. Your fire safety knowledge encompasses techniques for preventing cooking fires from escaping controlled areas while maintaining procedures for emergency fire suppression that could save your cottage and possibly your family's lives when cooking accidents threaten to destroy everything you own. Water kept constantly available near cooking areas provides emergency fire suppression, though using cooking water for firefighting means losing precious liquid that might not be easily replaced. Sand stored in containers near the hearth smothers flames more effectively than water, while creating less mess and water damage, though acquiring and storing adequate sand quantities requires additional labour and storage space in already crowded living conditions. The seasonal variations in cooking fuel affect both the types of food you can prepare and the cooking methods available throughout the year, creating annual cycles where cooking capabilities change according to fuel availability and weather conditions that determine what materials can be gathered and how effectively they burn. Summer cooking relies on gathered deadwood and dried plant materials that burn cleanly while producing less heat than needed for winter cooking tasks. Autumn preparation involves gathering and storing winter fuels, dried dung mixed with straw, peat when available, and hoarded wood supplies that must last through months when fuel gathering becomes impossible due to weather conditions. Your children's education in fire safety and cooking techniques begins from infancy with lessons that could save their lives while providing skills necessary for their own future family survival. Knowledge transmission that balances hands-on learning with safety precautions that prevent accidents in living spaces where open flames burn constantly. Teaching children proper fire behaviour around cooking areas requires constant vigilance and repeated instruction about distances, materials, and emergency procedures that become instinctive responses during dangerous situations. Children learn to recognise different types of fires, understand fuel characteristics, and master basic cooking techniques while developing healthy respect for flames that provide life while threatening death. The construction materials around your cooking area reflect ongoing battles against fire damage that threatens not only immediate safety, but also the long-term integrity of your family's shelter and possessions, requiring constant maintenance and replacement of materials damaged by heat, smoke, and occasional accidents. Stone hearth construction provides fire-resistant cooking surfaces while protecting wooden floor and wall structures from heat damage, though proper stone requires quarrying, transport, and construction skills that represent significant investments in time and materials. Clay daubing between stones and around hearth edges provides additional fire protection while requiring annual renewal as heat cycles crack and damage protective coatings. The social aspects of cooking over open fires create community knowledge networks focused on sharing fire management techniques, emergency assistance during cooking accidents, and cooperative fuel gathering that makes individual family fire maintenance possible through shared labour and resources. Neighbours share expertise about fire control, cooking techniques, and safety procedures while providing mutual aid during emergencies when cooking fires threaten individual households. Community firefighting efforts protect entire villages from fires that could spread from individual cooking accidents, creating shared responsibility for fire safety that extends beyond individual family concerns. The economic calculations surrounding cooking fuel encompass direct costs of purchasing fuel materials, labour costs of gathering and preparing fuel supplies, and opportunity costs of time and energy devoted to fuel management rather than other survival activities. Purchase fuel, charcoal when available, processed peat, even dried wood from commercial suppliers, provides reliable cooking heat while consuming precious coins that might otherwise buy food or other necessities. Gathered fuel requires time and labour for collection, processing and transport, competing with other survival activities while providing free cooking materials that reduce cash expenses during periods when money becomes scarce. The hollow eyes of your youngest child stare up at you from his place furthest from the fire, his thin arms wrapped around knees that protrude sharply beneath skin that seems stretched too tight over bones that grow more visible with each passing day of winter. You portion out tonight's meager stew with the terrible mathematics of medieval motherhood, calculating how much goes to your husband, who must maintain strength for tomorrow's labour, how much to your older children who can still work and contribute, and how much remains for the smallest ones, whose bodies demand the most nutrition precisely when the least food is available. This isn't cruelty, it's the brutal arithmetic of survival in a world where sentiment is a luxury that can kill entire families, where love must be measured against the stark reality that some family members are more likely to survive than others. Your children's hunger manifests in ways that would break modern hearts, but represent familiar seasonal patterns in medieval households where winter always brings the gradual diminishment of small bodies learning to survive on portions that would be considered starvation by any contemporary standard. The youngest ones stop their constant chatter first, conserving energy that talking would waste, their silence creating an eerie calm in your cottage that marks the beginning of winter's worst phase. They develop the hollow-eyed look of chronic malnutrition, their bellies swelling with the paradoxical distension that signals not fullness, but the body's desperate attempt to extract nutrients from foods that provide bulk without adequate calories. Your decision-making around food distribution follows harsh priorities that balance immediate survival needs against long-term family sustainability, creating moral calculations that would challenge philosophers, but which medieval mothers navigate daily through necessity rather than choice. Working adults receive priority portions because their death means the entire family's collapse, their continued labour providing the only income and resources that make any survival possible. Older children who can contribute labour, gather fuel, or assist with food preparation earn larger portions than those too young to help, creating incentive structures that teach survival skills while acknowledging economic realities that govern resource allocation. The physical changes that chronic hunger creates in your children's bodies follow predictable patterns that you've learned to recognize and manage, though management often means accepting deterioration that you cannot prevent rather than improving conditions beyond your means. Hair becomes brittle and thin, losing the glossy thickness that marks adequate nutrition, while skin takes on a greyish pallor that speaks of iron deficiency and vitamin shortages. Growth slows or stops entirely, creating children who appear younger than their actual ages, their bodies conserving resources for survival rather than development that requires nutrition unavailable during winter months. Historians still argue whether medieval childhood mortality rates reflected primarily disease, accident and violence, or if nutritional deprivation played the dominant role in determining which children survived to adulthood. though your own observations suggest hunger weakens children's resistance to illness, while making minor injuries potentially fatal. A well-fed child might recover from winter coughs that kill malnourished siblings, while small wounds that heal quickly in summer become infected and dangerous when the body lacks resources for proper immune response and tissue repair. Your strategies for maintaining children's health during periods of severe food shortage encompass both nutritional maximization techniques and psychological support that helps small bodies endure deprivation while maintaining hope for spring's eventual abundance. Warming thin broths and stretching them with whatever vegetables remain provides liquid nutrition that goes down easier than solid food, while creating feelings of fullness that psychological provide comfort even when calories remain inadequate. Hot drinks made from herbs, tree bark tea, or heavily diluted milk provide warmth and flavour that make starvation more bearable while contributing minimal but precious calories. The behavioural changes that hunger creates in your children require management techniques that balance discipline with understanding, teaching survival skills while maintaining family cohesion during periods when desperation could destroy social bonds that hold households together. Hungry children become irritable, then listless, their normal childhood energy disappearing as bodies conserve resources for basic survival functions. Fighting over food portions increases while play activities decrease, creating household tensions that demand careful mediation to prevent conflicts that could damage family relationships permanently. Your knowledge of childhood nutrition limitations guides decisions about which foods to prioritize for growing bodies versus which can be safely eliminated when resources become critically limited. Understanding that children's developing systems cannot tolerate the same nutritional compromises that adults might survive. Fresh milk, when available, goes preferentially to the youngest children, whose growth demands complete proteins and fats that other foods cannot provide adequately. Eggs, rare and precious, are reserved for children showing signs of serious nutritional deficiency. The listlessness, hair changes, and skin problems that signal bodies beginning to fail under starvation pressure. The educational aspects of childhood hunger encompass teaching children to manage their own expectations while learning survival skills that will serve them throughout lives where periodic hunger represents normal seasonal variation rather than exceptional crisis. Children learn to eat slowly, making small portions last longer while maximizing psychological satisfaction from limited food. They develop techniques for distracting themselves from hunger. Simple games, storytelling, quiet activities that occupy minds without burning calories that bodies cannot spare for non-essential activities. Your medical knowledge around childhood malnutrition includes recognizing dangerous symptoms that require intervention versus normal hunger effects that children can survive with proper management, though intervention options remain severely limited by available resources and medieval medical understanding. Extreme lethargy signals immediate danger requiring whatever emergency nutrition you can provide, even if it means adults go without food entirely for days. Swelling in hands and feet indicates severe protein deficiency that demands immediate attention, though providing adequate protein might be impossible given your family's limited resources. The psychological impact of chronic hunger on childhood development creates lasting changes in personality, behavior, and worldview that shape children into adults who approach food security and resource management with attitudes formed by early experiences of scarcity and survival. Children who survive medieval hunger develop conservative approaches to consumption, hoarding behaviors, and anxiety around food security that influence their entire adult lives. They learn to value stability over adventure, security over opportunity, creating personalities shaped by early trauma that modern psychology would recognize as adaptive responses to chronic stress. The seasonal patterns of childhood hunger follow agricultural cycles that create predictable periods of plenty and want, teaching children to anticipate and prepare mentally for recurring deprivation that marks winter as dangerous survival periods, rather than festive holiday seasons. Children learn to recognize signs of approaching food shortages, decreasing portion sizes, increased emphasis on conservation, adult discussions about rationing, developing anxiety management skills that help them cope with recurring periods of hunger that represent normal life patterns rather than exceptional circumstances. The social dynamics within families experiencing childhood hunger create hierarchies and alliances that redistribute emotional support while acknowledging harsh realities about survival priorities that favour some family members over others. Older children learn to protect younger siblings when possible while understanding that their own survival depends on maintaining adult approval and demonstrating their economic value to family survival efforts. Parents develop selective emotional attachments that unconsciously favour children most likely to survive, protecting themselves psychologically while making practical decisions about resource allocation. The long-term effects of childhood malnutrition create adult health problems that perpetuate cycles of poverty and survival challenges, though these connections remain invisible to medieval understanding that lacks knowledge of developmental nutrition and its lifelong consequences. Children who survive hunger often develop into adults with compromised immune systems, reduced physical capacity, and reproductive problems that affect their ability to support families successfully. The cycle repeats as malnourished adults struggle to provide adequate nutrition for their own children, creating intergenerational patterns of deprivation that define peasant life across centuries of medieval European existence. The soft knock at your cottage door comes well past midnight, followed by a whispered voice you recognise as your neighbour Thomas, whose desperate words float through the thin wooden barrier. "Have you anything to spare? My youngest hasn't eaten in 2 days." You pause in the darkness, your hand hovering over the door latch, knowing that behind that simple request lies the shadowy world of medieval food trading, where desperation creates its own economy, where normal commerce fails, and families survive through networks of exchange, debt, and mutual dependence that operate beyond the official markets and legal frameworks that govern ordinary times. This is the black market of survival, where a handful of grain might trade for a day's labour, where information about food sources becomes currency, and where the difference between generosity and foolishness could determine whether your own children see spring. Your participation in these informal food networks requires careful calculation of risks and benefits that balance immediate survival needs against long-term relationships that might prove crucial during future emergencies when your own family faces starvation and needs assistance from neighbours who remember your past generosity or selfishness. Tonight's decision to share precious grain with Thomas creates a debt relationship that might someday return life-saving assistance to your own family, while refusing his plea preserves resources your children need, but damages community bonds that provide the only safety net available in a world without government assistance or social services. The mathematics of survival extend beyond simple calorie counting to encompass complex social calculations about reputation, reciprocity, and the fragile networks of mutual aid that make individual family survival possible. Your knowledge of underground food trading encompasses understanding which neighbours possess surpluses, who faces critical shortages, and how to negotiate exchanges that benefit both parties while maintaining secrecy that protects participants from theft, taxation, or interference from authorities who might disapprove of private food transactions. The widow Martha, whose husband died just after harvest, has grain stores she cannot consume alone, but lacks the physical strength for certain types of labour, creating opportunities for families with strong backs but empty stomachs to trade work for food in arrangements that benefit everyone involved. Young Peter, whose fishing skills exceed his agricultural abilities, trades fresh catch for preserved vegetables, creating protein for carbohydrate exchanges that diversify both families' nutrition while maximising each household's productive advantages. The timing of black market food trades follows patterns that balance seller desperation against buyer need, creating market dynamics that would fascinate economists if they occurred in official commercial settings rather than whispered negotiations conducted in cottage shadows. Early winter trades occur when stored foods remain plentiful, but families begin calculating whether their supplies will last until spring, creating opportunities for conservative households to trade surplus for labour, tools, or future obligations. Late winter desperation drives prices higher as supplies dwindle and families face starvation, though buyers' ability to pay decreases simultaneously, creating market collapses where food becomes available but unaffordable. Historians still argue whether medieval black markets represented primarily criminal enterprises that undermined legitimate commerce or necessary survival mechanisms that filled gaps left by inadequate official distribution systems, though your own experience suggests these informal networks serve essential functions that formal markets cannot address during crisis periods. Official markets require cash payments that starving families lack, operate on schedules that don't accommodate desperate hunger, and offer standardized portions rather than the flexible quantities that allow families to trade whatever they possess for whatever they need most desperately. Your bartering skills encompass understanding relative values of different commodities while negotiating trades that account for quality, quantity, perishability, and future scarcity patterns that determine whether today's exchange represents fair value or exploitation of desperate circumstances. A handful of salt might trade for several pounds of root vegetables, but only if the vegetables are still fresh and the salt remains pure rather than contaminated with sand or other adulterants that reduce its preservation effectiveness. Dried meat commands premium prices during late winter, but loses value as spring approaches and fresh foods become available, creating timing strategies that maximize trading advantages while minimizing the risks of holding perishable commodities too long. The secrecy required for black market food trading protects participants from multiple threats, including theft by criminals who target families known to possess surplus foods, taxation by authorities who claim portions of all food transactions, and jealousy from neighbours whose own desperation might drive them to violence against families perceived as hoarding resources during community-wide shortages. Meetings occur after dark in hidden locations. Transactions involve coded language that disguises their true nature, and participants maintain elaborate deceptions about their actual food supplies to prevent targeting by those who would take rather than trade for needed resources. Your reputation within underground trading networks determines access to the best opportunities while influencing the terms offered during negotiations that could mean survival or starvation for families operating at the margins of subsistence throughout winter months. Families known for fair dealing, reliable quality, and discreet behaviour receive priority access to scarce foods while building credit relationships that allow delayed payment when immediate resources are insufficient for needed purchases. Those who cheat, provide poor quality goods, or betray trading secrets find themselves excluded from networks that represent the difference between survival and death during the worst periods of medieval scarcity. The risk assessment involved in black market trading encompasses evaluating potential trading partners for trustworthiness, while calculating the dangers of exposure, theft, or legal consequences that could destroy families already operating at survival's edge. Trading with unknown partners carries risks of robbery, cheating, or betrayal to authorities, while limiting trades to established relationships reduces opportunities but increases safety. Each transaction represents a calculated gamble, where the potential benefits of additional food must be weighed against risks that could result in loss of existing supplies or even imprisonment that would leave families without providers during critical survival periods. Your storage and transportation techniques for black market goods require methods that conceal the true nature and quantity of commodities being moved while protecting valuable foods from spoilage, theft, or discovery by those who had claimed them through legal or illegal means. Small quantities hidden in ordinary containers allow movement without attracting attention, while false bottoms in storage vessels create secret compartments that protect emergency reserves from discovery during searches or raids. Transportation occurs during periods of low visibility, using routes that avoid official checkpoints and curious neighbours who might report suspicious activities to authorities. The seasonal variations in black market activity follow agricultural and economic cycles that create predictable periods of surplus trading, alternating with crisis-driven desperation exchanges that reflect the annual rhythms of medieval scarcity and abundance. Autumn black markets focus on preservation services and storage expertise as families prepare for winter, trading fresh foods for preservation knowledge or access to storage facilities that improve survival prospects. Spring markets deal in seed, tools, and credit arrangements that help families restart agricultural production after surviving winter's deprivation, creating cycles of debt and obligation that extend across multiple growing seasons. The enforcement challenges that authorities face in controlling black market food trading reflect the practical impossibility of monitoring all private exchanges, while acknowledging that attempting to suppress survival trading could destabilize entire communities during periods when official food distribution systems fail to meet basic needs. Local officials often adopt policies of selective blindness that ignore small-scale survival trading while focusing enforcement efforts on large-scale commercial black market operations that threaten legitimate merchant interests. The balance between maintaining law and preventing starvation-driven civil unrest requires official flexibility that tolerates minor violations while deterring major challenges to establish commercial hierarchies. The psychological aspects of black market participation encompass both the empowerment that comes from controlling resources during desperate times and the constant anxiety of operating outside legal frameworks while building relationships that depend entirely on personal trust and reputation. Successfully navigating black market trading creates confidence in one's ability to survive through resourcefulness and social connections, skills that prove valuable beyond immediate food acquisition. However, the constant need for secrecy and vigilance creates stress that affects family relationships while building worldviews that emphasize distrust of authority and reliance on informal networks over official institutions. The harvest festival that transforms your village in early autumn represents one of the precious moments when abundance briefly overpowers the constant spectre of hunger, when the successful gathering of grain, fruits and vegetables creates temporary plenty that allows your family to eat until satisfied rather than merely surviving on rationed portions. You join your neighbours in the communal celebration, watching children who've known hunger throughout the previous winter, now laughing and playing with bellies actually full, their faces round and bright with the temporary prosperity that successful agriculture brings to medieval communities fortunate enough to experience good weather, adequate rainfall, and crops that escape the diseases and pests that destroy harvests as often as they succeed. This brief season of surplus creates memories that sustain families through the long months ahead, proof that abundance is possible even in a world where scarcity represents the normal state of existence. Your participation in harvest celebrations follows ancient traditions that combine thanksgiving for agricultural success with practical distribution of surplus foods that might otherwise spoil before preservation techniques can extend their useful life. The communal feast transforms individual family harvests into shared abundance, allowing everyone to experience variety and quantity impossible within single household food supplies. Roasted meats appear on tables that normally see only thin broths. Fresh vegetables are consumed in quantities that would represent luxury during any other season, and even ale flows freely as the grain surplus temporarily makes abundant brewing possible without threatening family survival through the coming winter months. The timing of harvest celebrations creates natural boundaries between seasons of plenty and want. marking the transition from summer's growth to winter's endurance while building community solidarity that will prove crucial during the difficult months ahead, when mutual assistance could determine which families survive and which succumb to starvation. The celebration occurs precisely when preservation work becomes most critical, creating tension between immediate consumption and long-term planning that requires balancing present enjoyment against future survival needs. Eating too much during harvest festivals reduces stores available for winter preservation, while celebrating too little fails to provide the psychological sustenance that memories of abundance offer during months of deprivation. Your family's contribution to communal celebrations reflects both your agricultural success and your social standing within village hierarchies, creating opportunities to demonstrate prosperity while establishing relationships that provide mutual support during emergency situations throughout the coming year. Families with successful harvests contribute generously to shared feasts, displaying their success while building obligations that ensure assistance during future difficulties. Those whose crops failed face the delicate challenge of participating appropriately in celebrations they cannot afford, maintaining social connections while acknowledging their precarious positions within community food security networks. Historians still argue whether medieval harvest festivals represented genuine community solidarity or elaborate displays of social hierarchy that reinforced class distinctions while providing minimal assistance to the most desperate families. Though your own experience suggests these celebrations serve multiple functions simultaneously. The festivals create genuine opportunities for adequate nutrition during periods when such opportunities are rare, while also establishing social dynamics that influence resource distribution throughout the year. Wealthy families use celebrations to demonstrate their prosperity and generosity, while poor families participate as much as possible to maintain social connections that might prove life-saving during winter emergencies. Your preservation activities during harvest season require balancing celebration participation against the intensive labour needed to transform fresh abundance into forms that will survive winter storage, creating time pressures that force families to choose between present enjoyment and future security. The brief window of harvest ripeness demands immediate action. Grain must be threshed, fruits dried, vegetables processed. While celebration traditions pull labour toward communal activities that build social bonds but don't directly contribute to food preservation, managing these competing demands requires careful scheduling and family coordination that maximizes both preservation success and community participation. The surplus management strategies that emerge during harvest periods encompass techniques for dealing with temporary abundance that exceeds immediate consumption needs and storage capacity, creating opportunities for trade, preservation, and community assistance that establish relationships extending far beyond the harvest season. Extra grain becomes currency for purchasing tools, clothing, or services that families need but cannot produce independently. Surplus vegetables are shared with neighbours whose gardens failed, creating debt relationships that provide security networks during future emergencies. Even temporary abundance requires strategic thinking about maximising both immediate benefits and long-term advantages. Your feast preparation techniques during harvest celebrations involve cooking methods and ingredient combinations rarely possible during other seasons, creating meals that provide both exceptional nutrition and psychological satisfaction that sustains morale through subsequent months of deprivation. Fresh meat, available during slaughter season when animals reach peak weight, combines with newly harvested vegetables to create stews and roasts that represent the pinnacle of medieval peasant cuisine. Bread made from fresh wheat rather than stored grain provides texture and flavour that mark special occasions, while demonstrating the dramatic differences between abundance and scarcity cooking. The social rituals surrounding harvest abundance create community traditions that reinforce mutual obligations while celebrating successful cooperation that makes individual family survival possible through shared resources and labour. Traditional dances, songs and storytelling that accompany feast celebrations build cultural connections that unite villages around common experiences of agricultural success and seasonal transition. These rituals serve practical functions in creating social bonds while providing entertainment that costs nothing beyond time and energy, creating community wealth that exists independently of material resources. Your children's experience of harvest abundance provides crucial psychological foundations that sustain them through winter deprivation, creating memories of plenty that prove abundance is possible while building anticipation for future harvest seasons that motivate endurance through difficult, intervening months. Children who experience genuine fullness during harvest celebrations develop different relationships with food than those who know only chronic hunger, understanding that scarcity represents seasonal variation rather than permanent condition. These experiences create resilience and hope that prove crucial for psychological survival during months when physical survival becomes questionable. The economic calculations surrounding harvest festival participation encompass both direct costs of contribution and opportunity costs of time spent celebrating rather than preserving, creating complex decisions about resource allocation during periods when every choice influences winter survival prospects. Generous festival contributions demonstrate prosperity while building social capital, but they also reduce resources available for family preservation activities. Time spent in celebration creates community goodwill, while reducing hours available for the intensive labour required to process harvest abundance into preserved forms that will sustain families through winter months. The contrast between harvest abundance and winter scarcity creates psychological challenges that require managing expectations while maintaining hope during months when the memory of plenty makes current deprivation more difficult to endure. The dramatic swing from feast to famine within months tests families' ability to adjust consumption patterns while maintaining morale through periods that seem to contradict the evidence that abundance is possible. Successfully navigating these transitions requires mental strategies that balance gratitude for past plenty against acceptance of present limitations, creating attitudes that support survival while maintaining hope for future improvement. The religious aspects of harvest celebrations encompass Thanksgiving traditions that acknowledge divine providence in agricultural success, while requesting continued blessings for the coming year's crops and family survival. Church ceremonies during harvest season focus on gratitude for God's provision, while recognizing the precarious nature of agricultural success that depends on weather, pests, and other factors beyond human control. These religious observances create community rituals that unite villages around shared dependence on agricultural success, while providing spiritual frameworks that help individuals cope with the uncertainty that defines medieval agricultural existence. The lasting effects of harvest abundance extend beyond immediate nutrition to encompass social, economic, and psychological benefits that influence family and community relationships throughout the year, creating foundations for survival that extend far beyond simple calorie consumption during brief periods of plenty. Successful harvest celebrations build community solidarity that provides mutual assistance during emergencies, establish trading relationships that create access to diverse resources, and generate confidence that survival is possible through cooperation and hard work. These celebrations represent investments in social capital that pay dividends throughout the difficult months when individual families cannot survive independently but might endure through community cooperation and mutual support. The bundle of dried herbs hanging from your cottage rafters represents more than simple seasoning. It's your medieval pharmacy, a collection of plants that blur the line between food and medicine in a world where proper nutrition and healing remedies often involve identical ingredients prepared through different methods. You reach up to pluck a few leaves of dried mint, knowing they'll serve double duty in tonight's thin broth, providing both the flavour that makes survival food palatable and the digestive properties that help your family's stomachs process the rough bread and questionable preserved foods that form the bulk of winter nutrition. Your grandmother's voice echoes in your memory as you select herbs, her whispered instructions about which plants ease winter's ailments and which combinations prove dangerous when hunger makes any edible material tempting, despite potential toxic effects. Your knowledge of medicinal cooking encompasses understanding which common food ingredients provide healing properties that address the specific health challenges created by winter scarcity, malnutrition, and the confined living conditions that spread illness rapidly through medieval households. Onions, precious and carefully rationed, contain compounds that fight the respiratory infections that flourish in cold, damp cottages where smoke and poor ventilation create conditions perfect for disease transmission. Garlic, when you can afford or find it, provides immune system support that helps weakened bodies resist the opportunistic infections that claim lives when malnutrition compromises natural defences against bacterial and viral invaders that thrive in medieval communities. The preparation techniques for medicinal foods require understanding optimal methods for preserving healing compounds while creating edible forms that sick family members can consume and digest despite the nausea, weakness, and digestive problems that accompany both illness and malnutrition. Hot herbal broths extract water-soluble nutrients while providing warming comfort that helps bodies maintain temperature during fever periods when fuel conservation limits heating capabilities. Honey, rare and precious, serves as both medicine and food preservative, its antimicrobial properties preventing wound infections while providing concentrated calories that give strength to family members too weak for normal food consumption. Your seasonal collection of medicinal plants follows careful timing that maximizes therapeutic potency while ensuring adequate supplies last through winter months when fresh healing materials become unavailable and stored remedies represent the only defense against illness that could prove fatal without proper treatment. Spring collection focuses on early plants whose fresh growth provides vitamin-rich nutrition after months of vitamin deficiency, while summer gathering encompasses flowers and leaves at their peak potency. Autumn root gathering provides concentrated medicine stored in underground plant parts that survive winter conditions while maintaining healing effectiveness. Historians still argue whether medieval peasant herbal medicine provided genuine therapeutic benefits, or if positive effects reflected placebo responses in the natural healing that occurs when adequate nutrition supports recovery processes. Though your own experience suggests many traditional remedies offer real relief for common ailments. Willow bark tea genuinely reduces pain and fever through compounds that modern medicine recognizes as aspirin precursors, while chamomile provides measurable sedative effects that help sick family members rest when sleep becomes difficult due to pain, cough, or anxiety about survival prospects. Your diagnostic skills encompass recognizing symptoms that indicate which medicinal foods might provide relief, while understanding dangerous conditions that exceed the capabilities of home remedies and require seeking help from village healers or religious authorities whose experience might offer treatments beyond your household knowledge. Persistent cough accompanied by blood indicates serious lung problems requiring intervention beyond simple herbal teas, while fever that continues despite traditional cooling treatments suggests illness severity that demands whatever professional medical assistance might be available within your isolated medieval community. The integration of medicine and nutrition creates daily cooking practices that prioritize foods with healing properties while working within severe budget limitations that make purchasing specialized medicines impossible for families already struggling to afford basic survival calories. Winter meals automatically include whatever herbs provide immune support, digestive aid, or vitamin supplementation, turning every pot of pottage into potential medicine while ensuring precious healing plants get consumed rather than wasted through poor storage or preparation techniques that reduce therapeutic effectiveness. Your understanding of food combinations encompasses knowledge about which ingredients enhance each other's healing properties, while avoiding dangerous interactions that could create toxic effects when hunger makes any edible material seem worth consuming despite potential risks. Mint combines well with most other herbs, while providing digestive benefits that help process rough survival foods. But certain plant combinations create compounded effects that could prove dangerous to family members already weakened by malnutrition and chronic stress. Learning safe combinations requires generations of accumulated knowledge passed down through family lines that understand both benefits and risks of various herbal medicine approaches. The dosage calculations for medicinal foods involve understanding effective quantities for different family members while managing limited supplies that must provide healing benefits without depleting precious resources needed for basic nutrition throughout winter months when replacement becomes impossible. Children require smaller doses proportional to their body weight, while pregnant and nursing women need increased quantities to support their additional physiological demands. Elderly family members often need modified preparations that account for digestive sensitivity and the complex health conditions that aging creates even under optimal nutritional circumstances. Your preservation methods for medicinal plants encompass techniques that maintain therapeutic potency while creating forms that remain effective throughout winter storage periods, when fresh medicinal materials become unavailable, and families must rely entirely on preserved remedies for health maintenance. Proper drying techniques preserve active compounds while preventing mold growth that could make stored medicines dangerous rather than helpful. Oil infusions create concentrated medicines that resist spoilage while providing external treatments for wounds, joint pain, and skin conditions that worsen during winter months when hygiene becomes difficult and healing slows due to poor nutrition. The economic aspects of medicinal food production encompass both the direct costs of acquiring healing plants and the opportunity costs of time and resources devoted to medicine preparation, rather than other survival activities competing for family attention during periods when every task influences winter survival prospects. Wild medicinal plant gathering requires time and energy that could alternatively focus on food collection, fuel gathering, or other activities that directly support family survival. Purchase medicines compete with food purchases for limited family resources, creating difficult decisions about whether to invest in healing materials or additional nutrition that might prevent illness through improved general health. The psychological benefits of medicinal food practices extend beyond direct therapeutic effects to encompass the sense of control and hope that comes from actively addressing health problems rather than passively accepting illness as inevitable consequence of medieval life conditions. Preparing herbal remedies provides families with constructive activities during illness periods when normal productivity becomes impossible, creating purposeful work that demonstrates care while potentially improving health outcomes. The ritual aspects of medicine preparation create psychological comfort that supports healing through reduced anxiety and increased confidence in recovery prospects. The social dimensions of medicinal food knowledge create community networks centered around sharing healing information, while providing mutual assistance during illness periods when families cannot manage complex medicine preparation while caring for sick members and maintaining other survival activities. Experienced healers share knowledge about plant identification, preparation techniques, and treatment protocols while providing direct assistance during severe illness episodes that exceed individual family capabilities. These networks create village-level medical resources that supplement individual household knowledge, while building community resilience against health crises that could otherwise claim multiple lives during epidemic periods. The seasonal health patterns that medicinal foods address encompass understanding annual cycles of illness and nutritional deficiency that create predictable health challenges requiring specific therapeutic responses at different times throughout the year. Winter respiratory problems respond to warming, expectorant herbs that help clear congestion while providing immune support during periods when cold exposure and poor nutrition create vulnerability to serious lung infections. Spring digestive problems, caused by the transition from preserved winter foods to fresh spring plants, require herbs that support digestive adaptation while preventing the stomach problems that can accompany dietary changes after months of monotonous nutrition. The last handful of grain in your storage pot rattles like distant thunder as you pour it into your palm, each individual kernel representing a day closer to the critical moment when stored food ends and survival depends entirely on spring's uncertain promise of wild greens, early vegetables, and the gradual return of abundance that seems as distant as summer itself. Your calculations have brought you to this precipice exactly as planned, the stores carefully rationed to last until nature provides replacement, though nature follows its own schedule that cares nothing for human hunger or the desperate timing that determines whether families survive or join the countless peasants who perish during the hungry gap between winter's end and spring's beginning. This final grain will become tomorrow's breakfast, and after that your family's survival depends on foraging skills, community charity, and the wild foods that emerge slowly from soil still frozen despite the lengthening days that promise warmth and growth. Your knowledge of spring's edible timeline encompasses understanding which plants emerge first, which remain safely edible throughout their growing cycles, and which provide the crucial nutrition that prevents the diseases of malnutrition that claim lives even when food technically becomes available again. Dandelion greens push through snow patches weeks before other vegetables, their bitter leaves providing vitamins that winter-starved bodies desperately need, despite their harsh flavour that children reject after months of bland survival foods. Wild garlic shoots offer both nutrition and flavouring that makes other forage foods palatable, while early nettle provides iron and protein that begins rebuilding strength, depleted by months of inadequate nutrition. The dangerous transition from preserved foods to fresh spring plants requires careful management that prevents the digestive problems and nutritional imbalances that can prove fatal when weakened bodies attempt to process foods their systems haven't encountered in months. Too rapid a shift from winter's starchy, preserved diet to spring's fresh, green foods can create diarrhea that further depletes already compromised nutrition, while preventing absorption of the very foods that should restore health. Your experience teaches gradual introduction of spring foods while maintaining whatever preserved foods remain, creating dietary transitions that support recovery rather than creating additional health crises during the vulnerable period when survival hangs in the most delicate balance. Your foraging schedule follows the gradual emergence of edible plants through spring's progression, creating daily expeditions that must produce adequate nutrition while requiring energy expenditure that weakened family members can barely afford. Early spring foraging yields remain minimal, a handful of shoots here, a few bitter leaves there, requiring extensive searching for small quantities that supplement rather than replace the rapidly dwindling stored foods. The timing becomes critical as you balance energy spent foraging against calories obtained, ensuring that food gathering activities actually contribute to family survival, rather than hastening starvation through excessive energy expenditure. Historians still argue whether the medieval hunger gap represented a regular seasonal challenge that most families navigated successfully, or a periodic crisis that claimed significant percentages of rural populations during particularly difficult years. Though your own experience suggests the gap's severity depends on multiple factors including previous year's harvest success, winter weather severity, and early spring conditions that determine when wild foods become available. Mild winters followed by early springs create easier transitions, while harsh winters extending into late springs create desperate situations where families face weeks of potential starvation before adequate wild foods emerge. Your children's adaptation to spring foraging requires teaching plant identification skills while managing their weakened condition that makes extensive outdoor activity dangerous, creating educational challenges that balance learning opportunities against conservation of precious energy. Hungry children learn plant recognition quickly when their survival depends on successful identification, but their enthusiasm for foraging must be balanced against their reduced physical capacity that makes them vulnerable to exhaustion, injury, and exposure during the outdoor activities that spring food gathering requires. Teaching becomes a delicate balance between necessary skill development and protective limitations that prevent further weakening of already compromised health. The community aspects of spring foraging create both cooperation and competition, as all village families simultaneously seek the same limited wild food sources that emerge slowly and in quantities insufficient for everyone's needs. Established foraging territories reduce conflicts while ensuring equitable access to wild food sources, though enforcement becomes difficult when desperation drives families to overharvest or encroach on others' traditional gathering areas. Sharing information about food plant locations and timing creates mutual benefit, while maintaining some secrecy about the most productive sites ensures family survival when resources prove inadequate for community-wide sharing. Your preservation efforts for early spring foods focus on extending their useful life while building reserves that bridge the gap until more substantial wild foods and early cultivated crops become available in quantities adequate for family survival. Drying techniques preserve early greens in forms that remain nutritious while occupying minimal storage space, creating emergency food reserves that provide security against the possibility that spring food emergence might occur later than anticipated. Pickling methods transform fresh spring plants into preserved forms that resist spoilage while providing varied flavors that make monotonous spring diets more palatable. The gradual improvement in family health that accompanies successful spring foraging creates observable changes that mark the transition from survival mode toward recovery, though the process remains fragile and easily reversed by setbacks in food availability or weather conditions that halt wild plant growth. Colour returns to children's faces as vitamin-rich spring greens address deficiencies that created the pale, greyish complexions of late winter malnutrition. Energy levels slowly increase as adequate calories become available again, though recovery remains incomplete until more substantial foods replace the light nutrition that early spring plants provide. Your meal planning during the transition period requires creativity that combines dwindling preserved foods with emerging fresh foods in proportions that maximize nutrition while ensuring adequate calories for family survival. Early spring meals might combine the last stored grain with fresh dandelion greens, creating combinations that provide both sustaining carbohydrates and essential vitamins while using ingredients from completely different sources and seasons. These transitional meals represent culinary creativity born from necessity, combinations that would seem strange during times of abundance but which provide optimal nutrition during the crucial period when survival remains uncertain. The psychological aspects of surviving the hunger gap encompass both the desperation that accompanies dwindling food stores and the hope that builds as spring foods gradually become available, creating emotional transitions that parallel the physical recovery from winter's deprivation. The sight of first spring plants emerging provides psychological relief that extends beyond their immediate nutritional contribution, offering proof that abundance will return and that survival through winter's worst period has been achieved. This hope proves crucial for maintaining the motivation necessary for continued foraging efforts when early spring yields remain discouraging. small and survival still requires daily effort and attention. The agricultural preparation that occurs during spring's early period creates additional demands on time and energy that compete with foraging activities. Though successful crop establishment remains essential for preventing repetition of survival challenges during the coming winter, preparing garden plots, planting seeds, and tending early crops require significant labour investment that weakens already compromised family members while offering only future rather than immediate nutrition. Balancing these competing demands requires strategic thinking about which activities provide the best returns on limited energy expenditure, while ensuring both immediate survival and future food security. The weather dependencies that influence spring food availability create anxieties that extend beyond simple concerns about comfort, since late frosts, excessive rain, or continued cold can delay plant emergence and extend the hunger gap beyond a family's ability to survive on remaining stored foods. Each day's weather becomes a source of intense concern as families calculate remaining food supplies against the time required for adequate wild foods to emerge. Favourable weather brings relief that extends beyond comfort to encompass survival itself, while unfavourable conditions create genuine fear about family survival prospects that depend entirely on natural processes beyond human control. As you close your empty grain container and prepare to venture out in search of the season's first edible plants, you carry with you not just the immediate need for food, but the accumulated wisdom of countless generations who've navigated this same precarious transition from winter's stored abundance to spring's wild promise. The sunrise that greets your foraging expedition doesn't just mark another day, it represents hope that your family has survived winter's worst challenges and that the slow return of warmth and growth will provide the salvation that stored foods could no longer offer. Your footsteps crunch through frost that will soon give way to the soft earth of spring, leading you toward the wild greens that represent not just nutrition, but proof that the ancient cycle continues, that survival is possible, and that abundance, however distant, remains part of the eternal rhythm that governs medieval life. Word count 1497. The morning mist rises from thawing ground as you walk slowly through fields that still wear winter's brown cloak. But beneath that dormant surface, life stirs with the patient insistence of spring's return. Your eyes scan the earth for the first brave shoots of wild growth, those tiny green promises that abundance will come again, that your family's careful rationing and desperate preservation has carried you through to this moment of renewal. The hunger that gnaws at your stomach feels different now, no longer the desperate ache of winter's depth, but the manageable discomfort of someone who can see hope on the horizon, who knows that each passing day brings new growth, new possibilities, new chances for survival and eventual prosperity. You pause beside a patch where snow has melted completely, revealing the dark earth beneath, and there, barely visible but unmistakably green, you spot the first tender shoots of early spring plants. Your heart lifts with a gratitude that encompasses not just this moment, but all the moments that brought you here. The careful planning of autumn, the preservation work that filled your root cellar, the rationing decisions that stretched winter stores across the hungry months, the community connections that provided assistance when your own resources fell short. Every choice, every sacrifice, every moment of hunger has led to this morning, when survival transforms from desperate hope into quiet confidence. The ancient rhythm of seasons continues its eternal dance, caring nothing for human struggles, yet providing the framework within which those struggles find meaning and resolution. Winter's scarcity gives way to spring's abundance, just as it has for countless generations before you, and will for countless generations after. Your medieval hunger becomes part of this larger pattern, a small thread in the vast tapestry of human survival that spans centuries and continents, connecting you to every peasant who has ever walked frost-covered fields in search of spring's first edible greens. And now, as dawn breaks fully across the awakening countryside, as your basket slowly fills with the tender shoots that will become today's first truly hopeful meal, you understand that you have not merely survived winter, you have participated in one of humanity's oldest stories, the eternal tale of endurance, adaptation, and the quiet triumph of making it through another season to see spring return once more. Sweet dreams, fellow traveller through time. May your own winters be warm, your springs abundant, and your appreciation for simple nourishment as deep as the medieval peasants who knew that every meal represented a victory against the hunger that waited always just beyond the circle of firelight, ready to claim the unwary, the unprepared, or simply the unlucky. Rest well, knowing that you carry within you the resilience of all those who came before.